Hey everyone, how's it going? So today I have a little tag video for you. This is the What's Next tag, which is all about how you choose the next book you read. I was tagged by Hannah from Hannah's Books. I'll leave a link to her version of the tag. The tag was created by Bob of Robert G. Reader of Books. I will leave a link to his original tag video as well. So as I said, this is just a handful of questions about how you go about deciding what to read next. So starting with question 1, is your decision for choosing your next book based on random chance, or is there method to your madness? Well, how I choose my next book is by no means based on random chance, I wouldn't say, because I certainly don't, flip a coin and see what it lands on to choose my book, or use a random number generator. But there also is not really much of a method. I basically resolved a couple years ago. It was just when I kind of stopped making videos for a while and went on my hiatus. A couple years ago, I resolved to kind of take what I call an anarchistic approach to reading, which is where I just read whatever the hell I want, whenever the hell I want to read it, regardless of any other considerations regarding length or subject matter or anything about the author or whatever. Which is not, of course, to say that other factors don't play into what I choose to read. We'll get to that because there are some questions about that. But I have this kind of anarchistic approach to reading where I try not to think too hard most of the time about what I will read after I finish whatever I'm currently reading. And that has costs and benefits. The costs is that I'm a bit less disciplined. Back in the day, I used to kind of say, okay, you're going to read X, Y, and Z because of X, Y, and Z reasons, because it covers some subject you want to learn about, or because it's a classic that you want to read, or something else. And I used to do a lot more of that, and so I was a lot more disciplined in my reading, and I'm less disciplined now. And that might mean that I have read fewer kind of large tomes since I started this anarchistic approach to my reading. It also, I think, means I've read fewer really difficult books, although Lord knows I have read some long books and some difficult books, but I kind of feel like I do that less now than I used to. So that's a cost, but a benefit is that it kind of allows me to dive down reading rabbit holes if I want to. There's a great old video that a booktuber named Marsha, who doesn't even make videos anymore and hasn't made videos in a long time, did about reading rabbit holes and just like getting interested in one particular subject or just avenue of literature and just like reading a ton of stuff from it. And I feel like having an anarchistic approach to reading as I've had allows me to do that. Like this year, or a month ago or so, I just realized that I had been kind of neglecting my interest in queer literature, and so I just went to the library and I found a kind of sort of small stack of queer-related books, gay books, and just read through them. And so having that anarchistic approach allows me to do things like that, and allows me to do things like trying out new poets whenever I want to. That's been really fun. And the library has helped a lot with that, with just going crazy with what I want to read, right? It's not restricted to what's on my shelves. I can also get whatever I want from the library. So yeah, my choosing books, not based on random chance, but also not too much of a method, okay? So question 2 is, do your criteria for choosing fiction differ from how you choose nonfiction? Well, the unspoken assumption of the question is that I have any criteria at all. I mean, I'm like, that's a little bit generous because I don't have much of any criteria. But with that said, not being pedantic about it, I do kind of decide on, I feel motivated to read fiction books and nonfiction books for different reasons, usually. With a nonfiction book that isn't a memoir. Memoirs I read somewhat more like I read fiction. I'm not because they are fictional, but just because I usually am not necessarily reading them for the same reason that I read a lot of other nonfiction. In most cases, not all cases. But when I'm thinking about a nonfiction book to read, usually my motivation to read it, to some degree, has to do with something I want to learn about. So if I'm going to read a history book, some work of criticism, some work of journalism, sometimes a memoir. Again, sometimes memoirs are a little bit more educational. Sometimes they're more just about the story. But biographies, autobiographies, and so on, usually it has something to do with something I want to learn. Whereas when I go to pick a fiction book, I usually am thinking about, what kind of story do I want to experience right now? And how will that affect me at this point in my life? So that's a little bit vague, I know, but that's kind of my sense of how I go about deciding on a nonfiction book to read versus a fiction book. So, question 3. Do other people influence your next choice? Occasionally, yes, absolutely. If I am buddy reading something with a friend, then obviously I'll be reading that. Sometimes I just find out a book from someone I'm talking to and decide to read it on a whim. And I take recommendations all the time. That's what BookTube is all about, but I get recommendations in my real life. I look at TikTok as well. There's a lot of good bookish content on TikTok. There's a bad bookish content on TikTok as well, but a lot of good as well. And I certainly get recommendations from there as well. So yeah, definitely people can have a big influence on what I read. Not all the time, obviously. And a lot of the time when I find out about a book I want to read from someone, it might be a while before I get around to reading it. But occasionally I do just find out about a book from someone and go and grab it immediately and pick it up, right? All right, and then question 4, this is actually the last question. Aside from other people, what other influences might impact your choice? Well, current events, both in the world in general and in my own life, can have an effect on what I'm going to read. The most kind of prominent example of that happened recently was after the 2024 election. After that, I like a lot of people who are here on BookTube, I just needed to somehow do something to make sense of it. Not that I didn't kind of have a sense of what happened and why it happened. I had to do something to help me sort of work through what I felt and what I thought about it. And so as a result of that, I ended up picking up 2 books. I read These Truths, A History of the United States by Jill Lepore, which was really great. It really did actually give me kind of what I needed, which was that sense of sort of how we as a nation, in a very broad sense, got to where we currently are. But then I also picked up, perhaps even more relevant, I picked up a book called Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation by Kristen Kobes-Dumez, which is all about the history of white evangelicalism in the United States and its involvement in politics, but also really interestingly its relationship to ideas about masculinity and why evangelicals find someone like Donald Trump so attractive, even though he clearly flies right in the face in what he does in his life of so many values that should be cherished by Christians, you would think. Not a Christian myself, but you would think. So things like that will happen. I will also obviously pick up books influenced by things going on in my own life. That hasn't happened a lot recently, but if something significant goes on in my own life, that might affect what I read, right? One time, this was probably 10 years ago now, I was doing a cross-country road trip with my mom and my brother. My brother was moving from New York to Illinois, and I was going with him, and my mom was with us. And because we were on this road trip, I decided to read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, which, obviously, a heavy book, heavy choice, both in length and in subject matter, but it is kind of a road trip novel, and so I thought, this will be interesting to revisit on a road trip. So, things like that will happen. But I also pick up books for reading events. So, for example, I decided to take Maybe Midrash this year, which is an event that Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse hosts, where we're in the month of May, we're all invited to read about religion in nonfiction and fiction. And so I took that event as a prompt to start to read Christianity, the First 3,000 Years by Diarmaid MacCulloch, which is a beast of a book. It's about over 1,000 pages. I'll read some Shakespeare during Shake-tember, the event on Shakespeare that takes place in September. I usually read some nonfiction in Nonfiction November. This year I actually participated in Caribathon for the first time. I read The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, who is from the Caribbean, during Caribathon. So there was that. And I like to read some queer or queer adjacent books during Pride Month, right? During June, during American Pride Month. So that will influence my reading as well, sometimes. Again, not all the time. None of these things are very consistent, but they all are trends that emerge from my reading. So, yeah. And then number 5 is to tag friends. So I'm going to tag one person. I'm going to tag Alina from Eclectic Reads. I also just want to recommend her channel to anyone watching my channel. If you go to her channel, you'll probably recognize her because she was on BookTube for a while and then left and now is back, similar to me. But I wanted to tag her. I think her answers would be really interesting to these questions. But anyway, I will leave it at that and hope to talk to you all again soon.